Well, the clock has struck noon, so welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Lunch and Learn. My name is Andrea Davis. I'm the Executive Director of HAND, and we're glad you could spend part of your day here with us. Today's conversation is called Plans and People: How Local Comprehensive Plans Shape Our Communities. Comprehensive plans can feel technical or abstract, but they quietly shape how our communities grow, who they're designed for, and how decisions get made over time. This is a learning-focused conversation, not a comparison of communities. Every city is different, and comprehensive plans reflect local priorities, timing, and trade-offs. Our goal today is to make the planning process feel more accessible and hear how different communities approach it at different stages. I will pause for just a second for two important notes. First, of course, go Hoosiers. We have to honor our national championship, Indiana Hoosiers. Also, I wanted to say, our goal here today is to talk about comprehensive plans. I know there are some current events and some bills in the legislature that kind of relate peripherally to this, but today we're going to keep our focus on comp plans and like we said, the impact those have on our communities. And we'll ask that any questions you might have about legislation or current events we handle offline so that we can keep our time today focused on comp plans. Before we hear from our panelists, who you can see on your screens, I wanted to level set briefly on what we mean by a comprehensive plan. And believe it or not, my goal today is for you to hear more from the panelists than me. So we'll get this out of the way and hear from the folks who really know what's going on. A comprehensive plan is a long-range guide that helps communities make decisions over the next 10 or 20 years, if not longer. These plans typically address things like land use, transportation, infrastructure, parks, economic development, and quality of life. Housing is one part of that larger picture. Comprehensive plans don't dictate every decision, but they help set direction. They influence zoning updates, capital investments, and how communities think about growth over time. One important thing to remember is that timing matters. Some communities are actively updating their plans, some are implementing newly adopted plans, and others treat their plans as living documents that evolve over time. That's why today's panel is focused on perspectives from different stages. So we'll start with some introductions. Jennifer Miller is with the town of Sheridan and is currently leading an active comprehensive planning process. She will share insights from a community that's in the middle of gathering input and shaping a plan that reflects local priorities. Ross Hillary is with the city of Fishers and brings experience working with a comprehensive plan that's actively implemented and updated over time. He'll share how Fishers approaches planning as an ongoing living process. And joining us from Westfield are Kevin Todd and Caleb Ernest, who have been closely involved in the city's recently completed comprehensive plan. They will share perspectives on transitioning from planning to implementation and what comes next after a plan adoption. So to start, I'd love for each of you to just briefly share where your community is in the process, where you are right now, and kind of what happens next. Jennifer, do you want to start?
Sure. So we received our first draft of our plan Friday. So we have
Hot
gotten
off the
through
press.
the hot off the press. So we have gotten through the public input process in large part. There is one more opportunity for the general public to speak, and that'll be after the introduction of the plan to the Plan Commission, which should happen in March in our community. But yes, we are in that stage where we've kind of closed public comment. We're drafting. Our steering committee is reviewing those drafts. Our steering committee is made up of many community residents, those who have businesses in the community, and those who are interested in developing properties. So we've got a pretty good mix on our committee, and they're completing that review.
And they're actively involved in shaping the plan.
Yes, so we have our sixth steering committee meeting coming up in February after we get through this initial review. So they have been involved in the whole process, both in terms of providing input and then assisting in collecting public input.
Wonderful. Ross, why don't you tell us where Fishers is in its living plan?
Yeah, Andrea, very accurate on that description. So when the residents of the town of Fishers at that time voted to become a city, that really jump-started our process back in 2015. So Fishers 2040 is our comprehensive plan, and to your point, Andrea, that was a 25-year vision at that time, adopted in 2016, and then with the state requirements to have that updated every 5 years, we adopted it in 2021, which Jennifer very jealous of, like an active opportunity right now with residents, because 2021, as you guys are all familiar with, was just a really unpleasant time, right? And to host public, discussions during that was difficult. So I am excited though, because if we do the math correctly, 2021 was 5 years ago. So we are about to update our conference and plan for our 5 year update, and excited about that. But Andrew, to your point, very structured in Fishers. We look at the comprehensive plan like everyone else here all the time. It is brought up in every decision that goes before City Council and Plan Commission. We're looking towards that. Is this what we had thought it was going to be in 2016 or 2021? And if not, why? So, stuff, our community is changing all the time around us. So sometimes it doesn't need to be reactive, but we need to be okay with that and respond to that. So we use it all the time. It is very much a living document.
Very good. It's good to know all the effort that goes into a plan like that. It's actually used as opposed to just a plan that sits on a shelf.
Yeah, it's like 250 pages, so it is pretty light reading. You
Yeah, of
need
course.
it, but very much so.
Wonderful. And Kevin and Caleb, could one of you or both of you talk a little bit about where Westfield is? I know I was on one of the steering committees there, so I know, it's the plan exists, but where are you in terms of rolling it out right now?
Yeah, I'll probably start and then maybe kick it over to Caleb for additional information. But so we're a few months ahead of Sheridan's timeline at this point. We've got a final draft that is pretty much ready to introduce at this point. This has been, gosh, an 18, 19-month process for us since we really first selected our consultant group to help us through this process till now. And really, as kind of mentioned, a series of steering committee focus group, a lot of public involvement, and getting input into this plan. So yeah, we are days or weeks away here from unveiling it to the public in its final form for adoption and consideration.
That brings up a point that I don't have in my notes, which is, what does that process look like? The planning departments, I assume, are who kind of takes the lead in working with the consultants typically and the public. But then this goes to Plan Commission, goes to City Council or Town Council. I mean, what approval needs to happen to make these official documents?
Yeah, so at least right now, what we're going through is that we are going to be introducing the final draft plan to the City Council. And how it works in Westfield is that will then go to a public hearing at Plan Commission. And our process we have a workshop process that happens after the Plan Commission. So if the Plan Commission deems it needs to go to this workshop process, it will go to a third meeting. If the Plan Commission does not see that it needs to go to workshop, they can either push it to a second Plan Commission meeting for a recommendation vote to the City Council, or they could even just bypass that second meeting and vote on a recommendation at the same night of the public hearing. So those are all possible options that have happened here. And then lastly, there'll be a final City Council meeting where they will consider the adoption of the comprehensive plan. So that's kind of the short. There's some little nuances that could happen if City Council changes content. It'd have to go back to Plan Commission, but that's kind of the most expedited schedule, at least here.
Gotcha. And I assume it's the same in the other communities. Your elected officials are signing off on it.
Yeah, correct. And I think all of us and we didn't skip over this, but before it even goes to these public meetings, the steering committees that are involved, the one that you said on, Andrea, that's important too. So it's not just a couple meetings at city council or plan commission. It's a long kind of process that involves lots of residents, a lot of professionals in our community to kind of help guide those decisions. So to what you said earlier, we have four main chapters, and in this 26 update, we're adding two whole new sections, but we have land use, housing, neighborhoods, transportation, and parks. So we had people in our community sit on steering committees that helped guide staff and administration, just like Sheridan and Westfield before it goes to those public meetings.
Yeah, if I could add to that, I just for clarification, because I do think people only see the process when it's put in front of a plan commission or from a council. We had an open survey for approximately 4 months that we pushed out through several different venues, both in person, here, take the survey. We had a QR code that we put on flyers. We attended football games. We attended community events, everything just to push out our survey and to collect community input. We also had every consultant, every community is going to do it a little differently. For us, one of the things that got the biggest input was we did a What's Your One Wish for Sheridan?
Hmm.
And it was interactive, so it engaged a lot of people. And I do think it helped us reach a segment of the population that sometimes gets overlooked, our young adults
Hmm.
who are, they're not quite decision makers in the community, but they live here and they certainly have interests in what happens in their community and what
Sure.
kind of amenities are offered. And so for us, that was a key piece.
So what were some of the things you learned from residents or other stakeholders during this process? I'm dying to know what's the one thing, what's your one wish for Sheridan? So we'll start with Jennifer, but I'm interested in hearing what everybody's hearing from their residents.
So a few of our biggest items. One, we are a food desert. We do not have a grocery store located in Sheridan. So a grocery store was a top priority, followed by a coffee shop. And even though I had nothing to do with it, I want to pat myself on the back. We have a coffee shop opening up just a couple days a week in our downtown. So I feel like we're getting close to being able to check that box. Um, and then more restaurants, more opportunities to dine out were our three big items out of our comp plan from the community. We've also been working on other things that have had visibility that were parallel to our public input, which is things like improving our parks with new playground equipment. We had some pretty old playground equipment from my generation. And so
That's
the new
dangerous
equipment,
stuff from our generation.
yes.
It's all been recalled.
It has. So our youngest residents now also have new opportunities with the new playground equipment. So that was something that we were hearing, but was already a project that was kind of running parallel to this.
It's always good when you hear your residents want something you're already working on, I imagine.
Yes.
Good planning, good planning. What about you, Ross? What have you heard from Fisher's residents? I mean, you got to go back to 21 because you haven't really
Yeah,
initiated the
no,
20.
fair. Our two biggest things all the time, and we did a community-wide survey, probably not too dissimilar from Sheridan, was indoor recreation and outdoor recreation. Those are our two biggest things. So parks and open space, what opportunities can these suburban communities continue to add opportunities for people to get outside, whether that's physical or mental health, any of those things. So the residents were still asking, I want more, I want more parks. So how do we get that and tackling that in an area where land is extremely expensive? And so that's been a big task. We've been able to accomplish that in the past 5 years, adding around, I think, 250 acres of new parkland, some along 96 in the White River with Fisher's White River Park, Guy's Waterfront Park. So looking at different opportunities like that. And the other one was mainly, I think, a response to the capacity of our YMCA. That is such a huge destination for residents to go. They have community there around health, and the Fishers Community Center opened up. We've been open for a year now. Lots of free opportunities there for residents and guests. Indoor walking track over the holiday break was packed, and
Oh, I
and I
bet.
merged with some of our senior community, and I was clearly infringing on their walking time, but I was so neat to see that. And then those are over like the weekend break. To Jennifer's point, youth are very interesting to engage with, right? They don't get a vote yet, but in 4 years they're going to be part of the community voting block. We want them to be here. We want them to either go to a vocational school or come back after college and live here. So we want the place that they live and call home to represent them. And seeing that's one of our biggest struggles. How do you find a cool place for kids to go to? Because if you tell them it's cool or it's not cool, right?
Yeah.
And we're doing that in two different ways right now. The Art Center, trying to focus around youth and who enjoy art, opportunities for them to come in for free classes, and then man, the basketball courts and things at the community center have been packed with kids that enjoy athletics. So I think those are our two biggest things. Essentially, all recreation based.
Yep. That's what people are passionate about, right? What about Team Westfield? What have you learned from residents and stakeholders during your comprehensive planning process?
Well, so I'd say that one distinction, not too dissimilar from Sheridan and Fishers, they residents love their park space, they love being out there, being active. I think what was kind of a surprising factor was a lot of our residents differentiated between active and passive open space. We had a lot of residents and stakeholders who came out and spoke about the need and want to retain and expand on passive open space. They like being one with nature. They want to keep the trees. They want to keep that submersion into the natural areas in and around our community. So they really wanted to focus on that specifically. And I think the other factor that came up a lot that we've always heard a lot here, working here, is the residents and stakeholders, they want things to do. And right, that's not just, that's definitely sit down restaurants, that's definitely parks and entertainment, but they want to be able to do things within their own community. And we're very blessed to have like a county that is very rich in those opportunities. But a lot of the community, they want to do things here in our city. So activating that realm a lot more close to their doors, close to their businesses, that was something we heard a lot.
So we've heard a little bit about whether as a direct result of that feedback or happy coincidence, some of the things that residents have asked for have been implemented or coming down the pike. But how does what you're hearing from residents and the comprehensive planning process, how is that showing up in real world decision making in the decisions that you're making about a zoning request or an economic development? I know this is the planning department, you guys don't deal with economic development, but how is the comprehensive plan and the work you're doing around that showing up in the decisions that you all are making as part of city government? I mean, obviously the community center in Fishers sounds like a direct response to a desire from residents to have more indoor space.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think also, like Kevin and Caleb and Jennifer, being in the room and vouching for the comprehensive plan and what we adopted as a community as a general reminder. So, for instance, I go back to parks again. In that comprehensive plan back in 2016, so I can use that as kind of data. It's like, there's a portion of our community that is lacking open space, and so if something comes up or there's a new project that says, okay, is there opportunity for land to be set aside for this? And I can say, back in 2016 as a community, a decade plus. And so that's really helpful. having that knowledge on your team and being able to use that and implement at the table.
I would assume Caleb and Kevin kind of on a similar tact. If what you're hearing from folks is we like nature, we want to keep our trees, that might give you pause when it comes to requests that would develop a natural area, things like
Yeah, I mean that great point. I mean, and our plan isn't even adopted yet, really, but that is one of the policy kind of discussion points that has really actively been part of development projects and decision making over the last year, especially, right? I mean, those are things that we're having community conversations about tree preservation and how important that is to our community. Our council members, our administration are really leaning into that too. And projects that have substantial tree stands I mean, it is, sometimes it is like the topic of discussion for these projects of how important it is to preserve those tree stands. So yeah, to that point, like we're not even at a really full public introduction and we're already implementing some of these policies that we're hearing.
Well, it seems like good policy to have your policies sort of match what your community wants, right? As opposed to having them running down
Right.
divergent paths.
Absolutely.
Jen, do you have anything you want to add to how the comp plan shows up in real world decision making?
Sure. I think, and Ross touched on it earlier, when we are evaluating development plans as they come through our offices, part of our reporting back to our plan commission and our council is how does this fit in with our comprehensive plan? Our decision makers are required by state statute to pay reasonable regard to the comprehensive plan in their decision-making process. So our reports include kind of an evaluation of how this fits or how it doesn't fit relative to the comp plan. I do think a lot of people assume that a comp plan warms a shelf or holds open a door in a lot of communities. And I would challenge that idea or that thought process and say, if you are actively doing planning in your community, you have people, your planning team, whether it's a consultant who may only come in once or twice a week, or if you have full-blown staff like in Westfield and Fishers, you have people who are evaluating, who are looking at the comp plan on a near daily basis, and working to help further those policies in that document every time a project is coming through their door.
That's an excellent point. One of the things we haven't talked a lot about, which may surprise people who know what HAND does, is housing. Obviously, we have an interest in the housing portion of comp plans. That may not be, the first thing that residents think of when they're asked what's their one big wish for Sheridan or Fishers or Westfield. But as I can attest, they also have opinions about where housing should go and what sort of housing it should be. Can you talk a little bit about how housing shows up in your comp plan and what the comp plan tells you about future housing in your community? Maybe we'll start with Westfield this time. You guys are, oh no, wait, Ross unmuted, so he might be ready.
I did, yeah. So absolutely, it's one of our four main, I would say, pillar chapters. Housing neighborhoods is what we called it. So that was essentially looking at existing housing and future housing, to your point, Andrea. And I would say, just like the rest of Hamilton County and probably the U.S., we are a lack of housing, right? So we did a housing study ourselves in 2021 and then again in 2022, focusing on accessibility specifically. And it, just really called out what projection of population numbers are, which is tied deeply into all of our comprehensive plans and what that looked like. And essentially what I was saying was, you guys are great at building single family homes here in Fishers. You're missing what is essentially in the planning world called the missing middle. So is that duplexes, triplexes, townhomes, those type of things. Now, as a community, we do have a lot of those existing, but that's not enough, right? And there are lots of different types of housing that we don't have. I think Andrea, you touched on cottage core homes and lots of other opportunities, and they're not for everyone, right? So that's one of the main things Fishers is trying to accomplish. If you want to live in a single family home on a quarter of an acre, we have that for you. But what essentially we're missing as a community still is what are those other opportunities where people who don't want to live in there? And a lot of times we try to attach it to a generation. A lot of our generations they want the same thing, right? We may have a young couple who don't want to have, a yard to maintain, and we may have, a couple who is downsized or empty nesters and they don't want to maintain. Those are two different demographics who have two different income levels who do want the same thing, right? So really, we're looking for housing for all in our community and how we do that. I would say on the flip side of that, we can have a comprehensive plan, we can have a housing study, we can have these things. It needs to be communicated with our policymakers on why that's necessary and how we accomplish that.
Testify. Preach. Yeah, I couldn't think of the right word. Caleb?
Yeah, so kind of piggybacking off of that, we've always wondered how do we communicate the need, right? That's a very charged question, right? There's a lot of differing perceptions and speculation, and there's so much knowledge that goes out there about this and research and studies into it. For our purposes, we had a sub-consultant that specifically gave us an economic impact analysis, so that way they could pair all of our housing choices and types that were in our future map and the impact that's going to have economically on our community. And that's really important because it shows those hard numbers, the data that speaks a lot when you're presenting that to policymakers, to stakeholders, to even other staff members, in your organization. And so with that, I mean, a lot of what Ross is talking about, there's a lot of overlap that we're sharing here as well. I think the diversification of housing is the biggest objective that's come out of our housing theme, which is one of our kind of 5 main themes of our comp plan. But the diversification of housing includes all that missing middle housing, right? From everything in between single family and apartment complexes, that's all that missing middle. It's supported and backed up by that economic impact analysis. I keep referencing that, but that's really just connecting the assessed value that different residential types can bring and how impactful it can have on certain areas of the community.
Gotcha. I've seen a 3D map that Henry Metesky, the Carmel Redevelopment Commission director, does, where it shows basically assessed valuation of all the property in Carmel, and really tall charts and that's what you're talking about, something similar to that.
Yeah, that's part of the study that's in there as well, but it just shows also a comparison over the years from a taxing, from an assessed value standpoint. It shows how diversification of your housing types and all land uses, quite frankly, is really healthy for a community.
Again, I say preach. Jennifer, do you have anything to add?
No, I think Ross said it very succinctly. We know that we are missing housing types. Unfortunately, we being Sheridan, we're not in the financial position to do an in-depth housing study as a component of our comprehensive plan. But the good side of it is that we're a small town, so we can
Look around.
it's a matter of walking out our door and looking around and seeing what we have available. I imagine though that will with recent activities from the state legislature, that will become a very important thing for us, and we will have to do a special study specifically on our housing just to get a better handle on what exactly it is we have and what we need to be working towards.
Yeah, HAND also does periodic housing needs assessments in collaboration with the Noblesville Housing Authority and maybe different municipalities. Maybe that's something we can talk about because it does change. To your point about these comprehensive plans being living documents, our communities are always evolving, and the resident makeup is changing. I think it's interesting. interesting to note that. Your point about the missing middle is an interesting one too, because if you think about, we don't have that housing type, so we probably aren't hearing a lot from people who prefer that housing type, right? Because they're probably living somewhere where they can live in a townhome or a duplex or whatever. So we're kind of stacking the deck towards the single family homeowners and asking them what they want more of, and big surprise at single family homes. As you move from, pure planning into implementation, what does that transition look like? How can you, the point I think Ross made, you can have the best plan in the world, but until your policymakers agree, right, and approve the rezone that needs their approval, it's kind of good work with not necessarily the outcome you're expecting. So how can you take these excellent plans and implement them in ways that change your community for the better?
Yeah, I'll start off by saying, state requirements having your plan updated every 5 years, which allows you to, make changes, add new action items or goals, which is essentially what we did in 2021. But in between there is what do you do in between those? You can't just leave it on the shelf for 5 years and come back to it. So essentially what we do every year is take an update to our city council. And that is a great time for staff, and the last portion of the year to kind of review, meet with directors across departments and say, okay, what have you guys accomplished this year as it relates to the action items that are identified to be, DPW or engineering or any of those departments. And it really holds not only ourselves accountable, but it holds our city councilor accountable as well. And in showing why and what decisions they made in that past year affected us reaching those goals. So in 2021, we added essentially what was our implementation chapter. So all of our action items are in there. We have cute little icons that say, is this ongoing? This is a maintenance item that, we can never have all of our roads, as soon as you pave the last road, you got to start over at the beginning, right? So that's a continued item. You're never going to check that off, but there are items that you can kind of check off. And so that's what we do every year. We take that in front of council, and that helps us keep it at the forefront, not only of staff and the leadership team here, but also our policymakers. And that's been really helpful. The other thing that's in there as well is our thoroughfare plan. So, our transportation, we have to be reactive just like everyone else to county and state decisions when it comes to our roads. And so we update that annually as well. And so that is kind of in that big council update.
So the council update, they're just getting a report, or are they taking any action to?
Yeah, we're not making any changes to goals or anything that's in the comprehensive plan, but they are adopting this annually. It's like, we've seen this, we agree, we're updating this thoroughfare plan, anything that does need to be changed. So they are taking some action in that. And typically it's a thank you to staff for bringing this and showing us,
Sure.
Look at all we've accomplished this year. Essentially not meant to be a pat on the back, but really to say, okay, remember what we all agreed to as a community?
Right.
Let's keep working towards this.
That's important, I think, as the faces change, right? When elections come around, you may have different policymakers. Jennifer,
or explain why, as a community, we did a certain thing, which you may be a new elected policymaker. I don't get that. And I ran on a platform that was focused on this. And okay, well, there was a lot of decisions that went into this.
Your one new policy member doesn't get to change the comp plan.
Sure. Okay.
One of the ways that we will be implementing our new comprehensive plan is through a revised Unified Development Ordinance. That's typically the implementation tool where we can make sure that our policies align with the tools that we have to enforce those policies. That's the tool. And so we as a community will be embarking on a revision to our Unified Development Ordinance, which is coming about not just because of our comp plan, but also because of our reorganization as a community with Adams Township. So it was necessary for us to revisit our UDO, but that will immediately follow our comp plan.
And so that will be in effect for not just the town of Sheridan, but all of its zoning jurisdiction, which also includes Adams Township now. Is that
Correct. So the common terminology, basically Sheridan is all of former Adams Township. Adams Township no longer exists
gotcha?
through reorganization. So
Okay. So the town limits got broadened. Very good. What about Westfield? What does this
Yeah.
transition to implementation look like?
So no new tools really to talk about, but we will be doing the same things that Ross and Jennifer talked about. So the annual review is something that's going to be new to Westfield. We've had a comprehensive plan that's been in place for 20 some years. Haven't really had the staff capacity to do the annual or even 5-year review. We've done periodic updates to certain sections or amendments to certain geographic areas, but not really given a holistic really review and analysis of our comprehensive plan. That's going to change with this new comp plan moving forward. We have the staff in place now to do it. So we're going to follow in Fisher's footsteps in that and give the council an annual assessment of where we are, what we've accomplished, what maybe goals are we haven't really touched, and how and go from there. And every 5 years, maybe sooner, but at minimum every 5 years, reevaluate and see if we need to do any updates to the plan itself. Have policies changed, have conditions changed, things, new things come in that we need to add to the plan. So that's kind of part one. I'm excited. Excited really for 26 and beyond that we'll be able to do that finally as a community. That's something we've wanted to do, just haven't really had the capacity to do that. And then following up with what Jennifer was talking about, updates to the UDO, our Unified Development Ordinance, that's been our plan all along as well, on the heels of the comprehensive plan, to give a really good holistic overview or renewal essentially to our Unified Development Ordinance, so our zoning code really supports the policies, the land use policies coming out of the comprehensive plan. So that's a 2026 project. In fact, really, literally right before we jumped on this call, we had an internal staff strategy meeting about how to really start working on that this year.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
From a developer's perspective, the clearer the rules are, the better, right? We know what we're getting into. We know absolutely not will I be able to do what I want to do over here, but maybe over here. So
Right.
From the developer's perspective, big fan of rules.
well, if I could also add, clearer rules make it easier for us too. So
Absolutely. I think one of the things that strikes me as we talk about land use planning, and we have Westfield and Fishers and Sheridan, but Westfield and Fishers are kind of two sides of the coin, right? Westfield has a lot, and your zoning jurisdiction also includes undeveloped portions of Washington Township, right? Like not
Yeah,
just the city limits.
correct. We have a joiner agreement with the township that we do planning and zoning for the entire township. Yeah.
But there's still a lot of land around Westfield that hasn't been developed yet. Whereas Fishers, I think I was on a housing task force a million years ago. And I think part of what we were grappling with was the fact that so little of Fishers' developable land remained. So it's like you really got to be sure to be intentional when you have, 2.5% of your land is still available versus, much more. I don't know what the percentages are, but and same with Sheridan to some extent. Your town borders may have grown, but there's a lot of land in there. You were saying before, there's a lot of agricultural land. Agricultural land is going to have to be rezoned if you want to do anything with it other than farm. So, how does that play into your planning? If like in Ross's situation, like we don't have a lot of land up for grabs. I assume part of the examination of it is looking at even the already developed areas and does it still make sense the way we planned it a million years ago? But
Yeah, that's a really good question, and something that we're working on as a team here. To your point, less than I think 3% of our land is quote unquote undeveloped yet. So what does that mean for that area? Is it the standard subdivisions we've been seeing for the past multiple decades, or do we look at this comprehensively and figure out a way to use our land
Is that where all your missing middle goes? Because that's
in
the
a
only
better
place
format?
left.
Exactly. I am intrigued by some, no shame on what they do because they are where we all live, but the Lennars and the Pulte's of the world. Um, Meeting with them has been interesting too because we've said, okay, we don't have the capacity for you guys to build what you have been building. What can this look like? And I think about a year and a half ago is when we met with Lennar and they were meeting with the Eaton family, who owned the Balmoral golf
Mm,
course and
mhm.
then the Balmoral Event Center. And it's a golf course on the west side of Fishers that is now going to be home to, I think, 120 new single family homes.
Wow.
First off, a very interesting reuse of that property. To Kevin's point, lots and lots of trees there. So what does that look like? And how do the people who used to live across from a golf course is now going to live across from a neighborhood going to react? And how do we work with them? But two, also the largest change in tax base on the west side of Fishers in decades. And so it was a very interesting project to kind of to come with. And what the residents eventually saw, those neighborhood meetings we had, and they're under construction right now, I think was site plan, EFGHI, right? We had gone through so many different iterations of that to try to make it feel and be this new neighborhood. So that's what we're dealing with now on one side, the redevelopment of existing
Yeah.
land alongside the development of undeveloped land, and then areas in the middle, right? So we might have a subdivision that already exists, but there was 5 acres that a single family home lived on, and they've lived there for a long time, and the families decided to sell.
Right.
So what does that look like? Do we leave it as one home? Does it become 5 homes? Does it become 50 homes?
Yep.
And so we're working on some what we're considering infill development standards, essentially to make it, just a little bit easier. Are there standards that we have that are important, but that we can work with the developer on? Distance from a pond to a road, things like that, they're all well-intentioned standards, but may make it a little more difficult for a project to come to fruition. So that's what we're working on right now.
Kevin, the world is your oyster. You have all kinds of undeveloped property out there. Does that make it easier or harder to implement a comp plan?
Probably depends on who you ask. Um, in a lot of ways, I think it's easier because it's easier to dream, right? It's easier to kind of vision out in the future, and we can identify things that we are missing as a community, right? At this point in our development and be able to plan for where those things might need to go, right? Because we do have the room to do that. Um, so from my perspective, I think it's a little bit easier to have. What are we at? Like 35-40% of our jurisdiction is still rural, right? Agricultural rural. So to not to say that it's all going to be developed, right, someday, but like to think about how that um, might play into the equation of filling in some missing holes in our land use pattern.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's easier.
It seems like a kind of blank slate
Yeah.
versus, Jen, do you have anything you'd like to chime in?
Yeah, I agree with Kevin. I think it depends on who you ask. Because I would say for us, it's been a scary process to look at all this land that's available and know just the multitude of variations that could occur in terms of development in those in that area of our community, and understanding that there is a something of a permanence to development when it occurs, especially when you're talking about a single family residential neighborhood or an apartment complex versus commercial properties, or industrial properties. So for us, I will say, I think it has been a scarier proposition to look at all this open space. We have clear ideas in terms of where we want to see development occur. And even the types of development. But we stayed intentionally, when you look at our land area, we stayed very small in terms of what we see happening perhaps in the next 10 years, as opposed to looking at 20 or 25 years down the line. I think one of the advantages Sheridan does have is we have had this amazing front row seat to everything that has happened in the southern part of the county with Carmel, Fishers, Noblesville, and Westfield. So there are some lessons that those communities have learned for us, and we are trying to be very cognizant of that as we move forward.
Yeah, I'll add, um, gaining consensus on how these, undeveloped areas should be planned was not easy either. Is not easy. I mean, you ask 10 different people, you're going to get 10 different answers or more, um, depending on who you're talking to again. But like, so I think to Jen's point, it is probably scary to think, I'm trying to remember back, when Westfield was maybe certainly smaller, maybe closer to Sheridan size, 20 years ago when we were going through this exercise, probably a lot of similar experiences and feelings and emotions and discussions and things like that in our community about growth and about development and how far out should it go and what should it look like and how dense and all of those points, right? And as the community has grown and followed our plan, right? Continued to grow out and develop. I'm not saying it's gotten necessarily easier over time, but I think there's maybe a little more acceptance than what we experienced probably 20 years ago in the community of just acknowledging that growth is coming or has come. So how do we make the best of it now?
Right.
So we've maybe cleared maybe 20 years ahead of you, Jen, on that. So yeah.
Excellent point. I mean, it's coming. You can either plan for it well or you can react to it. And I think we know kind of what most of us prefer. We do expect to have a couple minutes for questions. There's one in the Q&A if others would like to add questions. I am going to share my screen to share a tool that Carrie put together. And we know that housing is just one part of a much larger planning picture. But we created a one-page handout to help connect planning decisions back to people in everyday life. It's called A Housing Lens for Comprehensive Plans, and I'm gonna find it and then I'm gonna share. So you should be able to see that. We will be sending this out to everyone who registered for the webinar today. This isn't a checklist or a way to judge plans. It's just a set of guiding questions meant to encourage thoughtful, constructive engagement as members of the community are invited to engage with planning departments and these fine folks that are speaking today. Using a housing lens simply means asking questions like how housing choices connect to access to jobs and services, how plans think about different life stages and the housing needs we have during different points of our life, and how long-term decisions shape who can live in a community over time. Like I said, it's not a scorecard. We're not trying to pit community against community, but we wanted to give folks the tools that would help, kind of lead to a productive conversation in your community. So I will stop sharing that. Like I said, everyone who registered and the panelists will get a copy of that. I will go ahead and ask the question that's in the Q&A, but we do have time for a couple questions. So we'll keep responses high level if we can. So the question from Brittany Heidenreich, the missing middle was mentioned as an aspect of some comp plans. Do any of these comp plans specifically reference affordable housing? And how can comp plans be used as a tool to support affordable housing projects that HAND or other developers lead? I know no one wants to
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And the answer is yes to mine. I wanted to make sure that I checked it as I was typing as you were talking. And yes, we specifically called out the integration of a variety of housing, including affordable senior apartments and single family homes. what we're looking for as a community are those areas in what we're calling amenity-rich neighborhoods, right? Do they have access to all their types of needs? It does not make a lot of sense to put a multifamily or apartments in the middle of a cornfield that don't have access to groceries or don't have access to transportation, which we struggle in Hamilton County for. We think everyone has a car. A lot of people don't.
Yeah.
Um,
Cars are expensive.
Exactly, yeah. And as part of that accessibility, it also focused on our disability community, right? That's probably our number one ask of, I'm a capable person, I live by myself, and I want to get a job, but I have transportation needs. How can you guys help me with that? So I think how comp plans can be used as a tool for affordable housing is just looking at ours and saying, hey, as a community, we said this, policymakers, city planners, how can we continue to do this? And what we found working with HAND or Real America is finding those partners that are going to own and maintain those senior communities or affordable communities. I'll be one to admit you will have a brand new quote unquote luxury apartment complex that would come to town. They build their building and within a year they sell it, right? And so that is not talked about as much as when we have an affordable or a subsidized community come in. We want to make sure we know who is going to own that for the long term. And finding partners like HAND and Real America has been really helpful in that. That's to kind of guarantee that that area is going to be maintained, which is usually one of our points that our policymakers are asking. Well, how's this going to look, and who's going to be in charge of it? When you have that kind of checked off, it makes it a little bit easier.
Absolutely. And thanks for the confidence in HAND's work. You all could be saying that if you actually, Jennifer does. We have a property in Sheridan as well as Fishers.
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of provide a comment to this with regards to Sheridan's comprehensive plans. So our last comprehensive plan was 2013, and that plan heavily spoke to affordable housing, attainable housing. It spoke specifically to coordination with HAND. We are home to Spicewood Gardens, which is a three-phase HAND development, and we are also home to Blackhawk Commons, which was done by Woda Group, and it is still managed by that company. So and when you combine those with our naturally occurring affordable housing, we have a large inventory of older homes in our community. We have a really strong base in that part of housing. And so our lens on housing in this coming comprehensive plan is very different.
It's probably all the other
because
stuff, right?
because we have had a focus on attainable housing and affordable housing in our past plan, and we achieved a lot of those directives. So housing does look very different for Sheridan in the new coming plan.
Yeah, Caleb or Kevin, could you weigh in on how housing shows up in the new Westfield plan?
Yeah, so not too dissimilar. We mentioned kind of more in a strategic way to maybe those in the community who are still trying to learn about affordable housing and what that means. You ask different people what affordable housing is, and you're going to get very different perspectives. So normalizing the expectation to talk about diversifying housing, and like I mentioned, kind of showing the more kind of the data-driven results of it can help kind of neutralize a lot of those wavering perspectives. But I wanted to focus a little bit on the tool, right? So, and how we use as a tool and to tie with other organizations such as HAND. In our implementation chapter of the comprehensive plan, we identify specific responsible parties as most implementation chapters do in comprehensive plans. So in those responsible parties that we coordinate with and that will continue to work with trying to achieve these goals. HAND is listed on a couple of them for our housing policies and other themes that we have, but it's not only leveraging the steering committee and stakeholder groups during the comp plan, it's leveraging those partners after, because you create strong relationships throughout creating these comprehensive plans. And I would really encourage to maintain those relationships outside and post a comprehensive plan approval, because you never know when that is going to play a supportive role in achieving those goals, especially in an affordable housing situation. So there's a lot of different partners that can come together on a project. And HAND has a lot of resources. Other partners have a lot of different resources. And where they may not be the one-stop shop for all of your answers, they also have an abundance of resources and can leverage their contacts as well. So the coordination and partnership of the responsible parties, it plays well when you come to all these different themes, just not just affordable housing.
For sure. I swear I didn't pay any of these panelists to say good things about HAND, so I guess we're doing something right. Thank you. We had another question pop up. I know Westfield integrates the school system within their planning process and discussions on what the future for the schools looks like. Do Fishers and Sheridan do that as well?
Absolutely. Anytime we've had a steering committee, a superintendent of the school sits on there. We also usually include other people who are working on, property maintenance and those type of things. Our DPW team, I think, actually still mows and maintains the majority of the fields our schools work on. So a lot of decisions that are made affects both organizations. And they're our largest employer, right? And they're in the game of educating our youth. So the decisions that we make as a community, as well as a school, are integrated completely.
Absolutely.
Yep, I would say the same. We're in the same situation. I do believe the schools are our largest employer in the Sheridan area. We have our school superintendent for Sheridan Community Schools is part of our steering committee for a comprehensive plan, so they've been heavily involved in that process. Like I said, we also attended football games, so we got a lot of parents and young families in terms of public input during that part of the public input process. And then also we have a technical advisory committee that has a chance to review petitions as they come through an approval process. And our school system is invited to send a representative to those meetings. So they are involved in not just the preliminary discussions of potential developments or in policy making for the town, but they are also involved in the what I would call the nuts and bolts, the implementation portion as well.
It makes sense. I mean, they're huge members of the community, stakeholders, if you will. So wonderful. All right. Well, we are running very short on time. So if anyone has some additional questions, I urge you to reach out to me or Carrie Hubble, our marketing and outreach person. I'm happy to communicate them with our fine panelists here. We know, let's see, I've lost my place. Here we go. Thank you for our panelists for sharing their perspectives, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. We hope this conversation helped make comprehensive plans feel more accessible and showed how different communities approach planning in ways that reflect their local context. We will be sharing the recording and resources with everyone who registered and our panelists, so you can, put it on your LinkedIn page. Thanks again for spending part of your lunch hour with us. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.